My sister smiled at me, glanced into the hallway, and left my ICU door open. I could not lift my hand. I could not turn my head. Even swallowing felt like dragging broken glass through a throat coated in dust. The air smelled of antiseptic and warm plastic. And every few seconds, the infusion pump beside me released a soft electronic chirp that seemed much louder than it should have been. Tessa stood beside the door for one final second. Her blonde hair was smooth, her cream sweater spotless, her expression gentle enough to fool anyone passing in the hall. Then she stepped out of sight without closing the door. A man entered almost immediately. He was tall, gray-haired, and dressed in a dark jacket over an open-collared shirt. A visitor badge hung from his chest. He did not rush, glance around nervously, or move like someone who had wandered into the wrong room. He walked straight to the IV pole, bent close enough to read the medication label, and studied the infusion rate without touching anything. Then he looked at me. He raised one finger between us and moved it slowly from left to right. My eyes followed because they were the only part of me that still obeyed. His face changed by less than an inch, but I saw the recognition settle into it. Good. You can hear me. I tried to reach the call button beside my right hand. My shoulder tightened. One fingertip scraped the sheet. The button remained several inches away, bright red and useless. The man watched me struggle but did not stop me. Instead, he leaned closer. Your sister thinks I'm here to prove you're confused, he murmured. She wants a statement saying you panic whenever anyone mentions the company. My breathing shortened. The muscles in my chest resisted every breath as if my body had forgotten how to work without a machine doing it for me. He took a folded strip of paper from his jacket and slid it beneath my wrist. 4 characters were printed across it in heavy black ink. VC417. My daughter received medication under that release code, he said. Valecare blamed her when it failed. Your delivery record carries the same code. The monitor above me accelerated from a steady rhythm into sharp, urgent beeps. Numbers climbed. My lungs pulled faster, shallower breaths, while my mind tried to force my body into stillness. The stranger lowered his voice again. Don't tell her you remember me. The alarm began screaming. Before I explain why my own sister arranged that visit, I hope you're doing well today. Stay with me, because the truth behind that release code changed more than one family, and please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. That scene took place in October, 2 years before I finally learned how many decisions had brought that man to my bedside. At the time, I knew only 3 things. I was in intensive care. My younger sister had deliberately left the door open for him, and he had just connected my illness to a patient I had never met. Footsteps struck the floor outside. A nurse hurried in, followed by another staff member pushing a portable cart. The man stepped away from my bed at once, palms visible, his expression shifting into controlled concern. She became distressed, he said. Her heart rate jumped after I spoke to her. The first nurse checked the monitor, then bent over me. Her name badge read Lena Ortiz. I fixed on it because letters were easier than faces. Faces moved too quickly. Letters stayed where they were. Marissa, look at me, Lena said. You're safe. Try to slow your breathing. Safe was not a word my body believed. The man remained near the foot of my bed, the paper under my wrist pressed against my skin. I wanted to look at it, but I did not want him to know I understood more than he had already confirmed. Tessa returned while Lena adjusted the oxygen tubing beneath my nose. My sister's concern arrived perfectly arranged. Her eyebrows drew together, her hand rose to her mouth. She looked first at the monitor, then at the gray-haired man, and finally at me. What happened? She asked. She reacted when I mentioned Valecare, the man said. Tessa exhaled as though this confirmed something painful but expected. That's what I was afraid of. Lena turned toward her. You know this visitor? He's Owen Hale, Tessa said. He's a medication safety consultant. Our family asked him to help us understand what might have happened before Marissa was admitted. Owen Hale. The name lodged in my mind beside the release code. Tessa stepped closer to Lena and lowered her voice, though not enough to keep me from hearing. My sister runs compliance at our company. She was under enormous pressure before she got sick. Whenever the sale or a patient complaint came up, she became convinced people were hiding things from her. That was the first lie she told in front of me after I woke. It was also carefully built from pieces of truth. I did run compliance. There was a sale. There had been patient complaints. I had believed information was being concealed because I had found proof that records had been changed. But Tessa was already turning my knowledge into a symptom. She may be experiencing ICU delirium, Tessa continued. The doctors warned us she might be confused. Lena did not argue, but she did not agree either. Delirium is a clinical assessment. I'll document what you observed and notify the physician. The distinction mattered. Tessa had offered a conclusion. Lena had reduced it to a family member's observation. Owen gave Tessa a brief nod, exactly the kind a paid consultant might give a client after completing a task. He did not look at me again as he left. His steps receded down the hall, measured and unhurried. Tessa waited until he disappeared before she pulled the visitor chair closer to my bed. "You scared us," she said softly. "Mom has barely slept. Dad has been calling the board every few hours. Everyone is trying to protect you, so you need to stop fighting." I stared at her. Her hand settled on the rail beside my arm. She wore the narrow gold bracelet our mother had given each of us when ValeCare opened its second location. Mine was probably in a plastic belongings bag somewhere. Tessa's shone beneath the fluorescent lights, as if nothing in our family had ever been damaged. "You're going to hear things you don't understand yet," she went on. "People may ask questions about work. You don't have to answer. Let me handle it until you're stronger." The monitor still beeped faster than before, but the alarm had stopped. Lena remained near the computer, entering notes. I forced myself to concentrate on the sequence of Tessa's words. "You don't have to answer. Let me handle it. Until you're stronger." Those phrases sounded protective only if I ignored the man she had sent into my room. Tessa touched my forearm. My skin recognized the pressure, but my muscles could not pull away. "Blink if you understand me." I kept my eyes open. For the first time, uncertainty disturbed her expression. Lena moved between us to check my pupils. "Marissa, I'm going to ask you some simple questions. Blink once for yes and twice for no. Can you hear me?" I blinked once. Tessa's fingers tightened around the bed rail. "Do you know you're in the hospital?" Lena asked. One blink. "Do you know the woman beside you?" One blink. "Is she your sister?" One blink. Lena paused. "Do you want her to remain in the room while I assess you?" I blinked twice. The silence that followed was more useful than any argument I could have made. Tessa laughed softly, but the sound carried no amusement. She may not understand the question. Lena repeated it more slowly. "Marissa, do you want Tessa to stay in this room right now?" Two deliberate blinks. Lena straightened. "I need some time alone with the patient." "I'm her emergency contact," Tessa said. "That does not override her expressed preference while she can communicate." Tessa looked down at me. The sweetness had left her face. What remained was not panic. It was calculation. She was deciding whether arguing would help or hurt her. She chose the smile again. "Of course," she said. "I only want what's best for her." She collected her handbag and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she looked into the hallway exactly as she had before Owen entered. This time, she closed the door behind her. Lena waited several seconds, then rolled a laminated communication board into my line of sight. The letters were arranged in rows. She explained that she would move through them while I blinked to select each one. The first word took nearly 3 minutes, but I finally spelled call, and Lena wrote it down. The second was a name, Renee. My attorney's name was Renee Caldwell. I had hired her for personal matters months earlier, before the sale of ValeCare became more than a possibility. Tessa knew she existed but believed Renee handled only contracts and estate planning. That misunderstanding was one of the few advantages I still had. Lena confirmed the spelling, then asked whether Renee was family. 2 blinks. "Attorney?" 1 blink. She wrote it down and continued. My next instruction took longer because exhaustion kept interrupting my focus, but I eventually spelled limit family. Lena read the words back to me. "You want visitor restrictions placed on family members?" 1 blink. "All family or specific people?" I selected one name, Tessa. Lena entered the request into my chart and called the charge nurse. She explained that the hospital would verify my capacity for specific decisions and bring in a patient advocate. No one treated my blinks as permission for unlimited legal decisions. They treated them as communication from a patient who had made a clear, immediate choice about access to her room. That was enough for the moment. When Lena repositioned my right arm, the folded paper slipped from beneath my wrist. She caught it before it fell to the floor. "What's this?" she asked. I fixed my gaze on the paper, then blinked once when she asked whether I wanted it kept with my personal items. She placed it in a clear patient property envelope, sealed it, and wrote the date and time across the strip. I did not yet know whether Owen had given me evidence or bait. Preserving it was still the intelligent choice. The patient advocate arrived before sunset. She was a compact woman named Monica Price, who spoke to me directly, not to the people standing around my bed. She verified that I could answer orientation questions consistently, then helped Lena contact Renee using the numbers stored in my phone. Tessa had taken my phone home with my handbag when I was admitted. The hospital reached Renee through ValeCare's public directory instead. Monica documented that the device was not in my possession and that my sister had removed it before I regained consciousness. That detail seemed small. Later, it mattered. Renee arrived just after 9 that night. She wore navy slacks, a rain-damp coat, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for the worst version of a problem she had already suspected. She did not touch me until I blinked permission. Then she placed 2 fingers gently over the back of my hand. "I'm here," she said. "You do not have to explain everything tonight." The pressure behind my ribs eased by a fraction. Monica showed her the sealed paper. Renee read the release code without changing expression, but her grip on the envelope tightened. I used the board to spell one name. Owen Hale. Renee wrote it in her notebook. Then I selected another message. Tessa sent. Renee's eyes lifted to mine. "You believe Tessa arranged for Owen Hale to enter your room?" One blink. "Did he threaten you?" I hesitated, then blinked twice. "Did he give you information?" One blink. "About that code?" One blink. She did not ask me to go further. Instead, she opened her leather folder and removed a printed confirmation page. 12 days ago, before you confronted anyone, June Park and I activated the preservation hold you requested, she said. The complaint files, email revisions, routing records, and audit logs were copied into the independent system under the company's compliance policy. My eyes stayed on her face. Renee leaned closer. Tessa may be able to change what appears on a ValeCare screen. She cannot change what was preserved before you entered this hospital. For the first time since waking, the room stopped feeling like a sealed box. I still could not lift my hand. I could not speak. My sister controlled my phone, my parents believed her, and a stranger had just linked my medication to an injured woman I had never met. But somewhere outside that room, an untouched version of the truth still existed. 15 days before Owen Hale entered my ICU room, my sister stood at the head of ValeCare's conference table and told a group of buyers that our company had never hidden a material safety problem. She said it with the easy confidence that had carried her through every room since childhood. Tessa did not merely answer questions. She made people feel clever for agreeing with her. Sunlight poured through the glass wall behind her, turning the edges of her blonde hair almost white. The North Star Health Partners team sat across from us with tablets, printed binders, and expressions trained to reveal nothing. At the far end of the table, my father watched Tessa as if she had already completed the sale. My mother sat beside him, smiling whenever one of the buyers nodded. I had spent most of the morning reading the disclosure checklist. North Star planned to purchase the majority of ValeCare's operating assets for roughly $30 million. The deal would pay off the $11 million expansion loan that had kept my parents awake for the past 3 years. North Star intended to retain most of our employees, and Tessa would receive a 3-year operating contract along with a closing bonus worth more than $1 million. On paper, it solved almost every problem our family had. That was exactly why I did not trust the relief in the room. Patient retention remains above industry benchmarks, Tessa said. Our adverse event numbers have also declined for 6 consecutive quarters. One of North Star's attorneys looked down the table at me. Marissa, as Chief Compliance Officer, are you comfortable with the safety metrics presented here? Tessa answered before I could. Marissa is never comfortable. That's why we pay her." The room laughed. My father laughed loudest. I kept my eyes on the attorney. "The numbers shown are consistent with the current dashboard. I am still completing the underlying file review requested in the due diligence schedule." Tessa leaned one hip against the table. "That means yes, but with more syllables." A second ripple of laughter moved through the room. I did not react. Tessa had spent years learning how to make my caution look like a personality defect. If I defended myself, I became rigid. If I ignored her, she called me humorless. The attorney slid a document toward me. "We'll need your confirmation that no material adverse event or unresolved product safety issue has been omitted from the disclosure schedules. I'll sign when the review is complete." The air changed by a degree. Tessa's smile stayed in place, but her eyes sharpened. "Of course. Marissa likes to inspect every brick before admitting there's a building. I prefer knowing whether the building is standing." This time, fewer people laughed. The meeting ended before noon. Tessa escorted the North Star team to lunch while I returned to my office on the second floor. ValeCare occupied a converted medical complex outside Columbus, with pharmacy operations on the first floor and corporate offices above. Through my window, I could see delivery vans leaving the loading bay in clean white rows. My review should have been routine. I had asked our compliance system to produce every complaint involving treatment failure during the previous 12 months, along with the original classification, later revisions, shipping records, and pharmacy notes. Most of the files were ordinary: a delayed delivery, a damaged cooler, a patient who missed a dose and blamed the company. 3 records were different. Each complaint had originally been classified as possible product-related treatment failure. Later, each had been changed to either underlying medical condition or patient misuse. The first revision happened 9 days after the original report. The second happened 6 weeks later. The third involved a 31-year-old teacher named Nora Bennett. Her complaint stated that several doses of an antibiotic had failed to control a serious infection. The first reviewer had questioned whether the product remained within the required temperature range during distribution. A later note blamed Nora for failing to follow administration instructions. I opened the pharmacy record. The release code ended in 417. I checked the complaint report again. The final version showed 419. Shipping listed 417. The pharmacy record showed 417. The complaint summary showed 419. Codes did not change by accident after 3 departments had already recorded the same number. I called Miles Denning, our information systems director. He arrived 10 minutes later with a laptop under one arm and a paper cup of coffee in the other. Miles was competent, impatient, and permanently offended by the existence of printers. I turned my monitor toward him. "Why does the complaint summary show a different release code from shipping and pharmacy?" He studied the screen. "Could be migration residue. We migrated this database 18 months ago. Migration errors can sit unnoticed until someone runs a weird report. This is not a weird report. To you, no report is weird. Reports are your natural habitat." I ignored that. "Who changed the classification?" Miles clicked through the audit display. "Operations Review Account. That account belongs to a role, not a person." "I know how role-based access works, Marissa." "Then tell me which person used it." He sighed and typed several commands. "I need the archived authentication table." "The visible record only shows the service account. Retrieve it." His fingers stopped. "Is this about North Star?" "It is about 3 patient complaints that changed category shortly before due diligence." Miles looked at the names. "You think someone cleaned the data?" "I think the records changed. I'm determining why." He lifted both hands. "I didn't reclassify anything." "I didn't say you did. You looked at me as if I had already hired a lawyer." "That is simply my face." He almost smiled, then thought better of it. "Give me a day. Give me the raw logs by tomorrow morning." Miles left with less coffee than he had brought in. I returned to Nora Bennett's file. A photograph showed the overwrap from one of her medication bags. The temperature indicator had darkened at the edge. A pharmacy note called the change inconclusive. Another note said the remaining product had been discarded before it could be tested. The final complaint resolution stated that no product defect had been established. Technically, That was true. It was also not the same as proving the product had been safe. That evening, my parents hosted dinner at their house in Dublin. They had bought the place 27 years earlier, long before ValeCare's expansion. It was comfortable, carefully maintained, and almost paid off. My mother had set the dining table with the china she reserved for family milestones, though no one called the sale a celebration yet. Tessa arrived late and kissed both our parents before sitting across from me. Dad poured wine. North Star's team was impressed today. They should be, Tessa said. We gave them a very good company at a very reasonable price. We haven't given them anything, I said. The review is ongoing. My mother passed me a bowl of roasted vegetables. Can we have one dinner without turning it into a deposition? I answered one sentence. It was the way you answered it, she said. Tessa lowered her eyes as though embarrassed on my behalf. It was one of her oldest tricks. She could provoke me, then become the person most saddened by the conflict. Dad cut into a steak. The sale clears the expansion debt. North Star keeps most of the staff. Your mother and I finally have security. This is not just about Tessa's bonus. I never said it was. No, you just sit there looking like we're all failing an exam. I put down my fork. 3 patient complaints were reclassified. 1 contains conflicting release codes. Tessa's expression did not change. Then investigate them. I am. Good. That's your job. I have not signed the disclosure certificate. My mother closed her eyes. Marissa, the certificate says there are no undisclosed material safety issues. I cannot sign that until I know what happened. Tessa leaned back. You don't know that anything happened. I know the records were changed. Records are corrected every day. Corrections should make them more accurate. Dad set down his knife. How serious could this be? I don't know yet. Then why bring it to dinner? My mother asked. Because all 4 of you spent lunch discussing the sale as though my signature was automatic. Tessa's voice softened. No one said automatic. We assumed you would act proportionally. Meaning? Meaning you would not destroy a $30 million transaction over 3 files before you know whether they matter. The word destroy hung between us. I looked at my sister. I'm not responsible for the consequences of information being true. You're responsible for what you do with it. So are you. Her jaw tightened. My mother reached for my hand, but I moved it to my water glass before she could touch me. Tessa has worked for years to get the company here. Every time she gains confidence, you find a reason to remind everyone that you're the serious one. This is not about her confidence. It is always about being right with you, Tessa said. You would rather prove a point than keep this family intact. I had heard versions of that accusation since we were children. When I corrected the household budget, I embarrassed Dad. When I warned Mom about a contractor, I undermined her judgment. When I questioned Tessa's promises, I was jealous of her popularity. Facts became cruelty whenever they inconvenienced someone else. I will not sign until I finish the review, I said. Dad looked toward the dining room window. Outside, the yard had begun to darken under a gray September sky. If this sale collapses, he said, the bank debt does not disappear. The employees do not stop depending on us. Your mother and I do not suddenly find another retirement plan. Patients are not collateral for our family's retirement. My mother's face went pale. Tessa stared at me for several seconds, then picked up her wine. You always know exactly which sentence will hurt the most, she said. I left before dessert. 2 days later, I met Renee Caldwell in a private conference room at her law office downtown. June Park joined us by secure video. June had spent most of her career overseeing hospital compliance and chaired ValeCare's independent audit and compliance committee. She was not a family friend, which was one reason I trusted her. I laid out the 3 complaint files, the mismatched code, and the timing of the revisions. Renee asked, Has Tessa seen your full analysis? No. Have you confronted anyone? Only Miles about the logs. Keep it that way, she said. You need evidence preserved before anyone knows exactly what you found. June agreed. Under ValeCare's whistleblower policy, I had authority as Chief Compliance Officer to issue a protected preservation notice. We did not download patient records to a personal drive or send them through ordinary email. June contacted the e-discovery vendor already contracted by ValeCare under a business associate agreement. The notice covered the complaint files, revision histories, routing records, authentication logs, internal emails, and due diligence materials. The vendor confirmed the hold that afternoon. Renee turned her laptop toward me. From this point forward, relevant changes will be preserved even if someone alters what appears in the live system. I still need to speak with Tessa. No, she said. She deserves an opportunity to correct the disclosure. She deserves due process. That is not the same as a private warning. If I go directly to the full board, she will say I ambushed her. Renee folded her hands. You are worried about appearing unfair to a person who may have altered patient safety records. I'm worried about getting this wrong. That is reasonable. Believing you can personally control how Tessa responds is not. I disliked the accuracy of that sentence. June held up a thick blue binder on the screen. Before you decide, review the shareholder agreement again. The next morning, she brought the original blue binder to my office. Tessa had insisted on revising the agreement 2 years earlier, after a minority investor at another healthcare company had been accused of billing fraud. At the time, she had called the bad actor clause essential. No one should be able to risk everyone else's livelihood and still control the company, she had said. June pointed to the relevant section. An independent finding of intentional misconduct can suspend voting rights. It does not instantly erase ownership. Mandatory redemption requires notice, valuation, and a separate process. So no magic trapdoor. Corporate law contains very few magic trapdoors. From my doorway, Tessa said, talking about me? She walked in without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes fell on the blue binder. I was reminding Marissa that the agreement protects the company, June said. Tessa smiled. That clause was my idea. I remember, I said. She rested one hand on the binder. Good leadership means planning for the possibility that someone puts ego ahead of everyone else. June glanced at me but said nothing. 4 days later, on September 30th, I asked Tessa to meet me after most of the staff had left. I placed the 3 complaint files on her desk. She read them without hurrying. The temperature data is incomplete, she said. It exceeded the review threshold for part of the distribution window. That requires quarantine and assessment. It requires judgment. The records were reclassified because medical review found other explanations. Medical review did not change the release code. Her eyes lifted. That was the first moment I knew the mismatch mattered to her. She closed the file. A temperature excursion does not prove loss of potency. No, it proves the product should have remained quarantined until someone established whether it was still usable. You have 3 complaints out of thousands of successful treatments. I have 3 complaints that someone made harder to find. Tessa walked to the window. Delivery vans sat below us under the parking lot lights. If you escalate this now, North Star walks, she said. The bank tightens the loan. Dad loses the value he spent his life building. Mom loses the retirement she planned around. Employees who had nothing to do with this start wondering whether they'll have jobs by Christmas. If we do not escalate it, patients continue using products we cannot defend. You always choose the rule over the people standing in front of you. The rule exists because patients are people too. She turned around. What do you want? Restore the quarantine. Notify June in the committee. Correct the disclosure schedule. Prepare the required report for the state. And if I disagree? You have until Monday morning. After that, I make the notifications myself. Her face became still. Are you really willing to take our parents' retirement away from them? I gathered the files. Patients are not assets our family gets to mortgage. I walked out believing I had given my sister one final chance to make the correct decision. That was my mistake. I had preserved the records. I had involved counsel. I had notified the independent committee chair. I had done almost everything a careful compliance officer should do. But I had still believed Tessa's greatest fear was losing the company. I did not understand that her greatest fear was letting me be the person who proved she had never deserved to control it. Months later, after investigators recovered the routing history, I read the executive order created that same night. It had been issued through Tessa's administrative credentials and scheduled 3 medication bags for my ordinary home delivery route. The last line read, assign the next 3 VC417 doses to Monsieur Vale's normal route. At the time, I never saw the routing order Tessa created that night. What I saw 2 days later was an ordinary white delivery van pulling into the parking lot outside my townhouse at 9:12 in the morning. The driver carried a sealed cooler to my door, scanned the label, and asked me to confirm my name and date of birth. Everything matched the delivery schedule in the ValeCare patient app. I had been receiving intravenous antibiotics at home for almost 3 weeks after a minor surgical infection. A nurse had inserted a PICC line before I left the hospital, and ValeCare supplied the medication, tubing, saline, and sterile dressings. I did not choose our company because I wanted special treatment. My insurance network and surgeon's office already used ValeCare, and changing providers midway through therapy would have created more complications than it solved. The visiting nurse, Carla Monroe, arrived 20 minutes after the delivery. She opened the cooler in my kitchen and inspected the temperature indicator attached beneath the lid. "Still green," she said. The seal around the cooler had been pressed unevenly near one corner, as though someone had opened it and smoothed it back into place. I noticed it because I noticed almost everything involving packaging. That did not make it suspicious. Foam coolers were packed by hand, seals wrinkled, and delivery bins were handled by several people before reaching a patient. Carla removed 3 medication bags. My name, prescription, dosage, pharmacy number, and expiration date were printed clearly on each outer label. She scanned the barcodes into the home infusion application. 3 green check marks appeared. "No alerts," she said. "Same schedule as last week." I looked at the release information on the app. It did not display the internal distribution code I had seen in the complaint files. Patients and visiting nurses did not need access to quarantine history or warehouse routing. The screen simply showed that the pharmacy had released the medication and the temperature record was acceptable. That was the deception Tessa depended on. She had not sent me a stained bag with a crooked label or a vial marked with a warning symbol. She had used her executive access to return 3 quarantine doses to active inventory, then routed them through the same process used for every legitimate delivery. By the time the cooler reached my kitchen, every system visible to me said the medication was safe. Carla watched me prepare the first infusion. I cleaned the work surface, washed my hands, checked the label against the order, and examined the bag for cloudiness or particles. The liquid was clear. "You could probably teach my orientation class," she said. "I would add a section on documenting refrigerator temperatures. You would add 6 sections and a written exam." I smiled despite myself. 7 sections. The infusion took a little over an hour. I felt no burning, rash, dizziness, or immediate change. Carla flushed the line, checked the dressing, and left after reminding me to call the pharmacy if my fever returned. By evening, I felt more tired than usual. I blamed the argument with Tessa, the North Star review, and the infection that had already disrupted most of my September. I answered 2 emails, reheated soup, and went to bed early. The next morning, my temperature was slightly elevated. I took the second dose because nothing suggested the medication itself was dangerous. Treatment failure does not announce itself the moment a weak dose enters the bloodstream. The bag looked normal. The barcode cleared. The temperature indicator remained within range. The patient application showed no recall, warning, or hold. The only visible problem was my body. The soreness near my surgical site had deepened overnight. It was not sharp, but it had spread into a heavy pressure that made bending uncomfortable. By noon, my fever had climbed, and chills moved through my arms despite the sweater I wore inside my heated house. I called ValeCare's pharmacy support line. A pharmacist named Colin reviewed my account. "The batch history looks normal," he said. "No reported issues with the shipment. Have you missed any doses?" "No." "Any difficulty with the line?" "No redness, swelling, or leaking." "Your infection may be taking longer to respond. Continue monitoring your temperature. If it reaches the threshold in your discharge instructions, or if you develop shortness of breath, confusion, severe pain, or weakness, call emergency services." His advice was reasonable based on the information on his screen. The information was wrong because someone had made it wrong before he opened my record. I sent Renee a short email from my work account. "My fever is back, and the incision pain is increasing. Pharmacy says the delivery record is clean. I may need to postpone Monday's notification if I'm admitted, but the preservation hold should remain active regardless." She answered within minutes. "The hold remains active. Do not work through worsening symptoms. Contact your physician and document the medication bags and delivery cooler before anyone removes them." I used my personal phone to photograph the labels, cooler seal, temperature indicator, and supplies. I did not believe the medication was connected to the complaint files yet. Renee had taught me that preserving information before forming a conclusion was safer than deciding what mattered after evidence disappeared. By late afternoon, climbing the stairs left me breathless. I called my surgeon's office and was transferred to the on-call nurse. I gave her my temperature, heart rate from my home monitor, medication name, and the time of my last dose. She told me to go to the emergency department. "I don't think I should drive," I said. "Do not drive. Call emergency services." My hands were shaking badly enough that I almost dropped the phone. I ended the call and dialed 911. The dispatcher kept me talking while the pressure in my chest increased. I unlocked the front door, then sat on the floor beside the cooler, because standing had become difficult. When the paramedics entered, I gave them my name, medical history, and medication schedule. My words sounded slower than they should have, as if each one had to travel through water before reaching my mouth. 2 doses from this delivery, I said, pointing toward the cooler. 1 bag left. Keep all of it. One paramedic crouched beside me while the other photographed the labels and scanned the barcode information into his report. "Did you have an allergic reaction?" he asked. "No rash, no swelling, infection getting worse." He placed an oxygen mask over my face. "We'll take the cooler and remaining medication with us." "Separate bag," I said. "Document custody." He looked at me for half a second, probably wondering why a patient struggling to breathe was giving evidence instructions. "I work in compliance," I added. "That explains it." He sealed the medication, tubing, and cooler information inside a marked transport bag. The bag remained with the ambulance team and was transferred to hospital staff when we arrived. Tessa never had access to it. The drive to the hospital lasted less than 20 minutes, but I remembered only fragments. Streetlights sliding across the ceiling. A blood pressure cuff tightening around my arm. A paramedic asking me the same orientation questions more than once. My lungs working harder, while each breath seemed to accomplish less. In the emergency department, voices overlapped around me. Someone asked about allergies. Someone else called for blood cultures. A physician explained that my infection might have progressed despite treatment. I tried to say that the remaining medication had to be tested. I was no longer sure the words came out clearly. The last thing I remembered was a respiratory therapist fitting a larger mask over my face while a doctor told me they might need to place a breathing tube. When I opened my eyes again, 3 days had passed. I learned what happened between those moments from my medical record, Renee, and the people who were present. My blood pressure had fallen shortly after admission. The infection had progressed into sepsis, and my breathing deteriorated enough that the medical team intubated me. They changed my antibiotics, admitted me to intensive care, and notified Vale Care that a patient using one of our home infusion products had experienced treatment failure. Tessa arrived after I'd been placed on the ventilator. She came with our parents and immediately presented herself as the person who understood both my medical history and the company. Because I was unconscious, unmarried, and had no adult children, the hospital accepted her as a temporary family contact while staff searched for any advance directive or designated healthcare representative. That did not make her my legal owner. It did give her access to conversations in which doctors asked what I had done before becoming ill. Tessa told them I had been under extreme stress. She said I sometimes ignored my own limits when focused on work. She suggested I might have delayed a dose, changed the infusion time, or failed to refrigerate the medication correctly because I was distracted by the North Star transaction. The physicians documented her statements as family-provided history, not established fact. That difference later protected me. My parents did not challenge her. They had spent years watching Tessa translate my behavior into explanations they preferred. If I worked late, I was obsessive. If I questioned a decision, I was suspicious. If I refused to sign a document, I was punishing the family. Now I was unconscious, and Tessa had the only voice in the room. She also took my handbag and phone. She told the nurse she would keep them secure at our parents' house. The nurse logged that my sister had removed my personal property before I regained consciousness. Tessa could not reach the evidence cooler, which had already entered hospital custody. But she had my messages, photographs, contacts, and access to any application that did not require a second authentication step. Months later, a forensic review showed she opened the ValeCare patient app from my phone that night. She also attempted to access my work email, but Renee had already asked our security administrator to preserve and restrict my account after learning I had been admitted. Tessa did not know that. What she did know was that I might wake up remembering the 3 complaint files, the release code mismatch, and the ultimatum I had given her. The morning after my intubation, she contacted Owen Hale. I was not present for that conversation. I learned its details through Owen's sworn statement, the consulting agreement, the invoice, and the emails Tessa later claimed she had forgotten. Owen operated Hale Medication Safety Consulting under his real name. Months earlier, he had arranged for his company to appear in a risk management broker's directory used by ValeCare. Tessa had already hired him once to review how an unresolved patient complaint might be described to the audit committee. She believed he was discreet, cynical, and willing to help executives control difficult narratives. She did not know that Nora Bennett was his daughter. Nora had used her married surname when she received treatment. Her former husband had handled the original complaint and insurance correspondence. Owen's name did not appear in the ValeCare file Tessa reviewed. In her email, Tessa told Owen that I had suffered a severe infection while under unusual emotional pressure. She asked whether he could assess my response when the company was mentioned and prepare a statement about possible confusion or paranoia. Her instructions became more explicit on the phone. She wanted him to enter after my sedation was reduced. She wanted me awake enough to understand references to the complaint files but physically weak enough that I could not control the interaction. If my pulse increased or I appeared frightened, he was to describe the reaction as irrational agitation connected to work stress. She did not ask him to touch my medication or cause another medical emergency. She wanted a document. Owen later admitted that before seeing my name, he had considered declining. Then Tessa attached a summary containing the VC417 release code. It matched the distribution record from Nora's treatment. That was when he accepted. By the time I regained awareness on October 9th, Owen had already decided he would not write the statement Tessa wanted. He entered my room to determine whether I understood him and to warn me that my medication was connected to his daughter's case. The monitor alarm brought the nurses before he could explain more. After Renee arrived that night, she confirmed that the preservation hold remained intact. The hospital's patient advocate helped me revoke Tessa's temporary access to medical discussions and placed a restriction on visitors. Owen's authorization was suspended until his identity and role could be verified. Using the communication board, I asked the hospital to preserve my blood cultures, medication administration record, emergency report, and the sealed evidence bag from my house. Each request took several exhausting minutes to spell. None of them felt heroic. I was weak, frightened, and dependent on other people to turn my blinks into words. But being dependent was not the same as being powerless. The following morning, Renee brought a secure laptop into my room. She opened the preservation archive while Monica, the patient advocate, stood beside her. The original routing record was still there. It showed that 3 VC417 doses had been moved out of quarantine and assigned to my delivery route through an executive override. Then Renee opened the live ValeCare system. The same record now showed a different explanation. It claimed the original quarantine had been a clerical error and that the medication had passed routine review. The edit had been made after I entered intensive care. Renee looked at me over the laptop screen. "Someone didn't just send those doses to your house," she said. "They came back after you were unconscious and rewrote why." The morning after Renee showed me the rewritten routing record, a physician I had never met asked me what would happen if I allowed my sister to keep making medical decisions for me. He did not ask whether I loved Tessa. He did not ask whether my parents considered her trustworthy. He asked whether I understood the consequences of a specific choice. Monica, the patient advocate, stood near the window while Lena positioned the communication board where I could see it. Renee remained seated against the wall and did not answer for me. My breathing tube was gone, but my throat still felt scraped raw. I could produce a faint sound, not a useful sentence. My arms were stronger than the day before, though lifting my right hand even an inch made the muscles tremble. The physician introduced himself as Dr. Shah, then explained the assessment in plain language. Capacity was not one permanent label. A patient could be capable of deciding who received medical information while still needing help understanding a complicated financial document. He asked my name, location, month, and why I had been admitted. I answered through the board, blinking when Lena reached the correct letters. Marissa Vale. Riverside Medical Center. October. Infection. Sepsis. Breathing failure. The words took time, but they were correct. Dr. Shaw asked whether I understood that removing Tessa's portal access would prevent her from speaking with staff or viewing updates, unless I later gave permission. I selected yes. What is the benefit? He asked. Privacy. What is the possible disadvantage? Slower family updates. He nodded and asked who I wanted as my authorized contact. Renee Caldwell. My lawyer was not a healthcare professional, so Renee could not make clinical choices merely because I trusted her. I was asking the hospital to communicate through her while I recovered enough to make my own decisions. Dr. Shaw documented that I had capacity for visitor access, release of information, attorney contact, and immediate care preferences. More complex business decisions would be evaluated separately when necessary. Monica revoked Tessa's portal proxy and added a note that no medical information was to be released to my parents without my permission. The change did not make me well. It did something nearly as important. It returned ownership of my condition to me. My parents arrived before lunch carrying a leather folder. Dad looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier. His gray hair had not been combed as carefully, and the skin beneath his eyes had darkened. Mom carried a vase of flowers that the ICU would not allow near my bed, so she placed it on a counter by the door. They had been approved for a supervised visit after I agreed to see them. Tessa was not with them. Mom kissed my forehead. You look so much better. I could not tell whether she meant it or needed to believe it. Dad opened the folder. No one wants to pressure you, but there are a few temporary documents the board needs. Renee rose from her chair. I'll review them. Dad hesitated before handing them over. They are standard. The first was a medical leave notice. It stated that I would not participate in company decisions until cleared by a physician. The second delegated my compliance duties to a temporary executive chosen by Tessa. The third promised that I would not make public statements about ValeCare, its officers, patient complaints, or the pending sale without board approval. Renee read the final page twice. This is not a routine leave package. It protects the company while Marissa is recovering, Dad said. It prevents her from reporting potential misconduct. Mom lowered her voice. Must everything sound criminal when you say it? Renee laid the papers on the tray table. Who drafted these? Our corporate counsel, Dad said. At whose direction? He did not answer. Mom moved closer to me. Tessa says you were confused after the sedation. She says you became agitated whenever anyone mentioned the company. Tessa had no chart note saying that. She had only her own observation and the reaction she had arranged for Owen to provoke. Using the board, I selected review through Renee. Dad watched each letter appear. We are not asking you to sign away the company. No signature. His expression tightened. The board needs continuity. Temporary officer, not Tessa choice. Renee wrote down my instruction. Mom pressed her lips together. You have turned your hospital room into a battlefield. The accusation hurt because part of me still wanted her to notice who had brought the weapons. I took a slow breath and spelled another sentence. I did not bring papers. Mom looked at the unsigned documents. No one spoke for several seconds. Dad finally closed the folder. North Star is asking questions. If the transaction fails, people lose jobs. I pointed my eyes toward the door. Monica understood. The visit is over. My father looked as if he wanted to argue, but he gathered the folder. Mom touched my blanket before leaving. We are trying to keep this family from falling apart, she said. I could not tell her that it had already happened. I was only beginning to see where the cracks had started. That afternoon, Renee returned with a file on Owen Hale. His pharmacy license had expired 6 years earlier after he voluntarily moved into consulting work. Before that, he had spent 19 years as a hospital clinical pharmacist, including 7 years serving on medication safety and adverse event review committees. Hale Medication Safety Consulting was real. So were its insurance, tax registration, professional references, and contract with ValeCare. Tessa had signed the contract electronically at 6:42 the morning after I entered intensive care. The invoice described the assignment as an independent behavioral response assessment related to executive decision capacity. That is not a real clinical service, Renee said. It is corporate language wrapped around a predetermined conclusion. The visitor log showed that Tessa had authorized Owen as a medication risk consultant. His identification had been checked at the desk. He had not used a false name or hidden from hospital security. Renee arranged a secure video call with Owen. Monica remained in the room, and the call was recorded with everyone's consent. Owen appeared on the screen in a small office lined with pharmacy manuals and banker's boxes. He looked less threatening seated behind a desk, though his gray eyes remained difficult to read. I asked the first question through the board. Why did Tessa trust you? Owen folded his hands. I spent months making sure my company appeared in places her risk broker would search. I published an article about managing disputed adverse event claims. She contacted me after a broker included my name on a consultant list. Did you misrepresent your identity? Renee asked. No, I let her misunderstand my priorities. I selected the next question. Nora date? July 3rd, he said. 3 months before your delivery. Release code? VC417. It appeared on the patient label and pharmacy shipping record. Complaint number? He gave it without checking his notes. Who signed final review? Dr. Alan Pierce signed the medical conclusion. The reclassification approval came through an operations review account. I could not identify the individual user. That matched what I knew. Owen possessed the external record, but not ValeCare's protected authentication data. I asked whether he had evidence Tessa personally moved Nora's complaint. No, he said. I had a pattern, a changed code, and a company that stopped answering once my daughter challenged their explanation. That was not enough. Why enter my room? Because Tessa sent me your release summary. When I saw the code, I realized your illness might connect the internal records to Nora's case. Use me for revenge? His eyes stayed on the camera. At first, I wanted access. I believed anyone running compliance at ValeCare had probably helped bury Nora's complaint. The answer angered me, but it was honest. What changed? Renee asked. Tessa told me Marissa had become dangerous because she had found records no one else understood. She said Marissa had never known what operations was doing until the sale forced her to look. He leaned toward the camera. I did not decide Marissa was innocent because she was sick. I decided I needed facts from both sides before I accused another person. That answer was not comforting. It was credible. The next call included Nora. She appeared from a kitchen with yellow walls and a stack of student papers on the table behind her. Her dark hair had begun growing back after months of medical treatment, and a pale scar crossed the inside of her left arm. She held up a clear evidence sleeve containing the overwrap from one of her medication bags. The patient label remained attached. Beside it was the temperature indicator that had darkened along one edge. My ex-husband threw out almost everything after I was readmitted, she said. Dad recovered that from the recycling bin and has treated it like the Declaration of Independence ever since. Owen frowned. It was the only physical packaging left. He cataloged the coffee stain on the counter next to it. The stain established location. Nora looked at me. He has made our dining table unusable for 3 months. The corner of my mouth moved before I could stop it. It was not quite a smile, but Nora noticed. She described the infection that returned after several apparently normal doses. She had spent weeks in the hospital, then months rebuilding her strength. She had not taught a full semester in nearly a year. ValeCare's final letter blamed improper storage and inconsistent administration. I followed every instruction, she said. When I asked them to test the remaining bags, they said the product had already been discarded. I used the board carefully. I am sorry our system did that to you. Nora read the words, then shook her head. You do not have to apologize for your sister. I selected a second sentence. I am apologizing for the system I ran. The room stayed quiet. I had not changed Nora's file, but I had supervised compliance while a structure beneath me allowed it to happen. Refusing false guilt did not require denying every failure connected to my position. Nora nodded. Then help me make the record accurate. I agreed. Tessa visited the next day under supervision. She sat beside my bed with both hands folded around her purse. Her voice was soft enough to sound intimate while Monica stood by the door. "Northstar has agreed to wait," she said. "But they need proof the company is stable. We employ more than 200 people, Marissa. Their rent and health insurance do not pause because we are fighting." I watched her without responding. She placed a revised leave form on the tray. "Sign the medical leave. Let the independent committee review the complaints quietly. No public report until we understand the facts." I pointed to the communication board. "Why Owen?" She did not need clarification. "He is a consultant." "Why that morning?" "Because you were waking up, and we needed to understand whether work discussions were causing distress." "Who is Nora Bennett?" Her face changed for less than a second. Then she said, "I would have to check." It was the first answer she gave that confirmed she already knew the question mattered. I declined to sign. After she left, I agreed to work with Owen under written restrictions. All communication would pass through Renee. He could not contact ValeCare employees, approach patients, or remove original evidence. Every document would be inventoried, copied, and stored through counsel. Nora allowed us to use her medical and complaint records, but any statement issued in her name required her approval. Owen accepted every condition. That evening, Renee entered with a printed audit snapshot sealed in a document envelope. The preserved system showed that the quarantine on VC417 had been removed at 2:17 in the morning, 3 days after my confrontation with Tessa. The override had not come from Miles or a pharmacy account. The user ID belonged to the office of the CEO. By the end of my second week in the hospital, I could stand for 43 seconds with both hands locked around a walker. A physical therapist named Brooke counted the seconds while a gait belt pressed against my waist. My knees trembled so hard that the metal frame rattled against the floor. "Sit before your legs decide for you," she said. "I can make it to 60. You said that at 20. I tried to straighten, and my left knee folded. Brooke caught the belt and lowered me into the chair before I hit the floor. The failure angered me more than it should have. Before sepsis, I could work a 12-hour day, drive home, and still walk 3 miles before dinner. Now, standing beside a hospital bed required 2 people, a walker, and permission. Brooke crouched in front of me. "Your body spent days fighting an infection while machines kept you alive. Recovery is work. It is not a character test." I looked away because I did not want her to see how close I was to crying. That afternoon, I was transferred to an inpatient rehabilitation unit on the other side of the medical campus. My room had a wider bathroom, a lower bed, and a schedule taped beside the door. Physical therapy at 8, occupational therapy at 10, speech therapy after lunch. Rest periods were printed in bold. Renee added one more rule. No legal or business meeting could last more than 30 minutes. "I can manage an hour," I said. My voice had returned, but it was rough and quiet. Speaking too long made my throat ache. "You nearly fell after standing for less than a minute." That is unrelated to my ability to read an audit log. It is related to the fact that your brain is attached to the same body. I disliked the rule, which was one reason I knew I needed it. Our first meeting took place 2 days after my transfer. Renee sat beside the window with her laptop. Owen occupied the chair near the door. I sat upright in a wheelchair, with a blanket over my legs and a cup of ice water within reach. Renee placed a sheet of paper on the table and divided it into 3 columns. "What we know," she said, "what we suspect, what we still need to prove." Owen looked at the page. "That seems slow." "It is supposed to be slow," I said. "Slow keeps assumptions from turning into testimony." He opened a folder containing Nora's original complaint, her delivery record, the photographs of the overwrap, and the final letter ValeCare had sent blaming her storage practices. Under what we knew, we wrote that Nora's shipping and pharmacy records carried release code VC417. We knew the final complaint summary displayed a different code. We knew the medication remaining after Nora's readmission had disappeared before independent testing could occur. Under what we suspected, Owen wanted to write that Tessa had ordered the complaint altered. I stopped him. "We cannot prove that yet. She hired me after your admission and gave me the same code. That connects her to my case. It does not prove she changed Nora's file." His jaw tightened. "You still think this could be coincidence?" "No. I think it has to survive someone paid to call it coincidence." Renee added the item under what we needed to prove. We listed the user access history behind the operations review account, the authority used to release the quarantined medication, the barcode route that moved the bags to my address, and the identity of whoever changed the quarantine explanation after I entered intensive care. Owen provided his contract with Tessa, her emails, the payment record, and the written request for a behavioral response assessment. None of it proved she had weakened my treatment. It did prove that she tried to create evidence against my credibility while I could not speak. By the time Renee closed her laptop, 28 minutes had passed. "I can continue," I said. "No," she answered. Owen gathered his folder. "For once, I agree with the lawyer." "I heard that," Renee said. "I intended you to." After they left, I slept for almost 3 hours. Miles Denning was interviewed the next morning. Renee conducted the interview from her office. June Park joined as chair of the Independent Audit and Compliance Committee. I participated by secure video from rehab, with my speech therapist seated nearby to end the call if my voice weakened. Miles appeared on screen in the same wrinkled shirt he had worn to work the day I questioned him. He had hired his own attorney, which I considered sensible rather than suspicious. June began with the complaint records. Miles admitted that he had used the operations review account to change Nora Bennett's complaint from possible product failure to patient administration error. The words landed harder than I expected. "Why?" I asked. He looked toward his attorney before answering. "Tessa told me the medical review had cleared the product and the category needed to match the final conclusion." "Did you see that medical review?" "No." "Did you ask for it?" "No." "Why use a shared account?" "She said the correction had already been approved and needed to be done before the quarterly metrics closed." His attorney interrupted. Mr. Denning understood this to be an authorized administrative correction. Miles rubbed both hands over his face. "I understood that refusing the CEO over one field could cost me my job. That did not make him innocent." "You changed a patient safety record without reviewing the support," I said. "Yes. You knew the shared account would make the individual user harder to identify." He looked directly at me. "Yes." June asked whether Tessa's instruction had been written. "No, she called me." "Do you have the call record?" "I deleted most of my personal call history after the North Star process began because I was afraid the company would seize my phone." His attorney shifted beside him. Miles had just admitted to deleting information during a sensitive transaction, though not necessarily after a formal preservation notice reached him. Renee asked about the other 2 reclassified complaints. Miles denied changing them. June produced the archived authentication data. His credentials appeared behind Nora's complaint, but not the other 2. One change originated from a pharmacy supervisor's account. The other came through the office of the CEO. Then Renee asked the question that mattered most. Could Mr. Denning's access remove a quarantined medication lot from restricted inventory? "No," Miles said immediately. "Information systems cannot release medication. That requires pharmacy authority or executive override." "Could you route specific bags to a patient?" "I could repair a routing error after operations created it." "I could not originate an executive priority assignment." "Could you alter the reason code on an executive override?" "Not without impersonating someone with permissions I did not have." Miles had helped hide part of the pattern. He had not created the path that brought the medication into my kitchen. When the interview ended, I felt no relief. A man I had trusted with system integrity had admitted choosing his job over the accuracy of a patient record. At the same time, accusing him of everything would have been convenient and wrong. My voice had faded to a whisper by then. The speech therapist closed my laptop before I could object. June obtained the courier records that afternoon. The next meeting waited until the following day because Renee refused to let me review them from bed after evening therapy. I spent the night imagining missing scans, overwritten manifests, or a driver who could not remember one cooler among hundreds. Instead, the record was cleaner than anything I expected. The pharmacy had scanned all 3 VC417 bags into a sealed cooler at 6:14 in the morning. The cooler entered van 12 at 7:03. The driver scanned it at my address at 9:12. Carla Monroe scanned each medication bag before the first infusion. Every barcode matched. There had been no accidental swap at the loading bay, no driver error, and no nurse selecting the wrong bag from the cooler. A field in the routing manifest identified why the shipment had bypassed ordinary allocation. Executive priority. June enlarged the routing history on the screen. My patient number had been entered manually beside 3 quarantine doses. The system then generated a normal-looking delivery record for the driver, nurse, pharmacist, and patient application. That explains why I saw no warning, I said. June nodded. The warning existed internally. The override suppressed it from downstream screens. Owen leaned forward. Who entered the priority order? The office of the CEO. He looked at me as though the answer settled everything. It did not. A shared office credential does not prove Tessa's hands were on the keyboard, I said. June opened the access report. The quarantine had been removed at 2:17 in the morning. The login originated from the company laptop assigned to Tessa. The device connected through her home network. Multi-factor authentication had been approved through the phone registered to her. 4 days later, after I had entered intensive care, the same laptop and phone approved a second change. The reason for the quarantine was rewritten from temperature review required to duplicate administrative entry. That was not a medical conclusion. It was an attempt to make the quarantine appear as though it had never been necessary. Owen tapped the screen. What more do you need? Proof she knew the medication could fail and chose my route because it was mine. She used her laptop, her phone, and her authority. She can say an assistant had access. At 2 in the morning inside her house? Implausible is not impossible. His chair scraped backward. My daughter lost almost a year of her life. You nearly died. How many layers of proof do you need before you call this what it is? As many as it takes. He stared at me. I lowered my voice because the effort of speaking had begun to hurt. If we move before the evidence is complete, Tessa will say you manipulated a sick woman because of Nora. She will say I created a compliance crisis to stop a sale I opposed. She will put patient names into the public fight, and every person who cooperates will be called dishonest or incompetent. So we wait while she keeps running the company? No, we use the system she believes she controls. Owen turned toward Renee. The press would force the board to act. The press would also publish allegations before regulators secure the records, Renee said. It could contaminate witness accounts and expose protected patient information. I asked June to open a formal independent investigation under the shareholder agreement. The committee would secure access logs, suspend deletion rights, preserve pharmacy records, and interview staff through outside counsel. Renee would notify the appropriate Ohio pharmacy and health regulators through protected channels. We also requested non-retaliation protections for Miles and any employee who cooperated, despite Miles's own misconduct. Owen objected. You are protecting the man who changed Nora's file. I am protecting truthful testimony. Consequences for what he did can come afterward. He did not like that answer. Neither did I. Wise decisions were rarely the ones that satisfied every emotion in the room. June approved the investigation that evening. 2 days later, she called during my rest period. I nearly ignored the phone because Brooke had threatened to remove it from my room if I skipped another scheduled nap. June's expression told me the call could not wait. North Star received notice that the independent review is open, she said. They are not automatically terminating the transaction. I adjusted the blanket over my knees. Why not? The purchase agreement gives ValeCare a cure period. Tessa can update the disclosure schedules, identify the affected complaints, and postpone closing while the committee completes its work. If she tells the truth, yes. And if she does not? Before closing, she must personally sign a bring-down certificate confirming that the disclosures are complete and that no material safety issue has been concealed. For the first time, Tessa would not be able to hide behind a shared account, an employee's fear, or a family explanation. The investigation had given her a clear path to save what remained of ValeCare. All she had to do was correct the record before signing her name. The first board meeting after the independent investigation opened began with Tessa asking whether I was medically capable of attending. She did not ask me directly. She asked June Park while my face was already visible on the conference room screen. I was still in inpatient rehabilitation. A walker stood beside my chair, and the schedule taped to my wall allowed 30 minutes for the meeting before occupational therapy. Renee sat to my right. A speech therapist waited near the door with instructions to end the call if my voice weakened. June looked toward the camera. Marissa has been evaluated for capacity regarding this meeting. She will present facts within her professional role. If she needs to stop, counsel will continue. Tessa folded her hands on the polished table. I'm not questioning her intelligence. I'm questioning whether this is the right moment to let a recent ICU patient direct an investigation involving her own illness. You are not being asked to let her do anything, June said. The committee authorized the investigation. My father sat 2 seats from Tessa. My mother was beside him, wearing the pearl earrings she used for bank meetings and funerals. Neither looked at the camera. The 2 independent directors attended in person with outside counsel. North Star was not part of the meeting. This was ValeCare's first formal chance to decide whether the evidence deserved protection or burial. I began with facts already verified. 3 medication bags from release code VC417 had been removed from quarantine through an executive override. The bags had been manually assigned to my ordinary delivery route. The login originated from Tessa's company laptop, connected through her home network, and the multi-factor approval came from her registered phone. After I entered intensive care, the quarantine reason had been rewritten from temperature review required to duplicate administrative entry. Tessa did not interrupt until I mentioned Owen. Before we treat Mr. Hale as a neutral source, she said, the board should know that Nora Bennett is his daughter. My parents finally looked up. Dad turned toward Tessa. The patient in the complaint? Yes, the same patient he conveniently connected to Marissa after gaining access to her ICU room. Renee placed the supporting identity records into the secure board portal. Owen had disclosed the relationship to us as soon as we could communicate, but Tessa had learned it only after outside counsel requested documents related to Nora's complaint. Tessa leaned back. He spent months positioning himself to get hired by ValeCare. Then he entered my sister's hospital room while she could barely move. That is not investigation. It is revenge. Part of what she said was true. Owen had wanted access. He had assumed I might be involved. He had allowed Tessa to believe he cared more about controlling claims than correcting them. I said, his motive does not authenticate a routing log. It affects whether anything he says can be trusted. I agree. The room became still. Tessa had expected me to defend Owen because doing so would make me look emotionally dependent on him. Instead, I asked the committee to suspend him from all employee interviews and internal evidence collection until Renee and outside counsel independently corroborated every item he had supplied. Owen was not on the call, but I had told him beforehand that this could happen. He had answered, "You're removing the one person who knows where to look." "No," I had said. "I'm removing the argument that you guided every witness to the answer you wanted." At the board meeting, I continued. His contract, invoice, visitor authorization, her release code appears in pharmacy and courier records. Those items do not become false. Because Owen has a personal reason to care. Tessa's attorney spoke for the first time. The company should also consider that Marissa experienced confusion after sedation. My mother shifted in her seat. Tessa opened a folder. Mom told the doctors Marissa was disoriented and fixated on work. Elaine looked at her. I said she was under stress before the hospital. You also said she seemed confused when she woke. I remembered my mother standing beside my bed while Tessa tried to describe my awareness as a symptom. She had not corrected her then. June asked, "Do you have a clinical assessment finding Marissa lacked capacity when she restricted access or contacted counsel?" "No," Tessa said, "but family observations matter." "They may be documented," June replied. "They do not replace a physician's assessment." Renee uploaded Dr. Shah's capacity note. It confirmed that I understood my location, condition, choices, risks, and the consequences of limiting medical access. It did not claim I was ready to run a company from a hospital bed. It established that I had made specific decisions knowingly. Tessa's narrative needed me either irrational or manipulated. The record allowed me to be injured, exhausted, and still capable of choosing who entered my room. June moved the meeting to the committee's authority. Under ValeCare's bank covenant, the 2 independent directors and outside counsel could preserve records, compel internal cooperation, place temporary restrictions on system access, and investigate conduct that threatened licensure or the company's ability to repay the expansion loan. The Blue shareholder agreement added another layer. June held up the same binder Tessa had once praised in my office. An independent finding of intentional false disclosure or material record manipulation permits temporary suspension of voting rights and removal from office. It does not cancel ownership. Mandatory redemption requires a final determination or signed settlement, notice, independent valuation, and an opportunity to contest the calculation. Dad frowned. So, no one is taking anyone's shares today? No, June said. Tessa's shoulders relaxed slightly. The committee did not have to prove every criminal element to suspend an officer, but it still needed corroboration of intent. A login from Tessa's laptop was powerful. Her attorney could argue that an assistant had remote access, that she had approved an administrative correction without understanding the medication history, or that the bags reached me through an operational mistake. The explanations were strained, but the committee would test them instead of assuming they were lies. June announced interim measures. No relevant record could be changed without outside counsel's approval. Tessa's deletion and override privileges were suspended. Pharmacy releases from previously quarantined stock required 2 independent approvals. She remained CEO during the investigation, but could not supervise witnesses or access the protected evidence repository. Tessa looked at me on the screen. You asked them to leave me in place so I could hang myself. I asked them to follow the agreement you wrote. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters in this meeting. The speech therapist raised 5 fingers behind the laptop. I had 5 minutes left. Tessa returned to Owen. She claimed he had approached former employees and frightened staff with stories about his daughter. Outside counsel confirmed that 2 employees had received calls from Hale Medication Safety Consulting before the investigation opened. I had not known that. After the meeting, Renee contacted Owen immediately. He admitted calling them. One was a former pharmacy supervisor. The other had worked in quality assurance when Nora filed her complaint. Owen said he had asked whether either remembered temperature excursions connected to VC417. He had not threatened them or requested protected patient information, but he had contacted them before agreeing to our written restrictions. You should have told us, I said during a recorded call. I thought the calls went nowhere. That was not your decision to make. You would have spent another month asking permission. And now Tessa can say every memory they offer was shaped by you. He rubbed a hand across his face. I was trying to find out what happened to Nora. I understand why you did it. I am still removing you from witness contact. His eyes narrowed. You trust the committee more than me? I trust evidence that can survive you. The sentence hurt him. I could see that. I did not take it back. Renee and outside counsel later confirmed both employees had refused to discuss patient cases with Owen. Their phone records showed brief calls, and neither had yet been interviewed by the committee. The evidence was not contaminated, but the risk had been real. Owen agreed to provide documents only through Renee. He would not contact staff, patients, regulators, or North Star without written authorization. Nora supported the restriction. My father can be right and still make a mess, she told me over the phone. He has been proving that my entire life. That small joke made it easier to continue working with him without pretending he was flawless. 3 days after the board meeting, my parents came to rehab. I met them in a family conference room because I did not want business papers beside my bed again. I walked there with the walker and Brooke at my elbow. Dad watched every uneven step but did not offer to help after I told him not to. Mom waited until I was seated. You are getting stronger. I am. Dad placed no folder on the table this time. I told June I support reviewing the complaint records. That is not the same as supporting the investigation into Tessa. I do not believe she knowingly sent bad medication to you. The product was not poison. It had been quarantined because its potency could not be trusted. She may have thought the risk was administrative. She used her phone to approve the override after I told her exactly what the risk was. Dad looked toward the window. I still need to hear her explanation. You have heard mine. You are asking me to believe one daughter tried to make the other sick. I am asking you to preserve evidence until the facts answer that question. Mom leaned toward me. North Star will leave if this becomes public. 200 families depend on those jobs. The committee is handling it confidentially. For now, she said. Withdraw the notice. Let the company correct the files and complete the sale. North Star can improve the systems after closing. I stared at her. She believed she was proposing compromise. Patients would receive corrections eventually. Employees would keep their jobs. Our parents would preserve retirement. Tessa would retain the role she had built her identity around. The only person required to accept immediate harm without justice was me. No, I said. Mom's face tightened. You would risk everyone for punishment. This is not punishment, it is disclosure. Do you hear how cold you sound? I hear how often this family calls consequences cruelty. Dad said my name in warning. I continued. When Tessa produced good numbers, you forgave how she obtained them. When she secured financing, you ignored the pressure she put on staff. When I questioned her, you treated my accuracy as the problem because her confidence felt better. You taught both of us that results could erase methods. Mom looked down at her hands. Dad's voice softened. We made mistakes. That does not mean we knew about your medication. I do not know what either of you knew. That is why your records need to be preserved too. His head lifted. You think we are suspects? I think family loyalty is not a record retention policy. The meeting ended without shouting. That made it more final. I allowed them to visit as parents, not as representatives of Vale Care. No documents, no requests involving the board, no medical discussions with staff unless I invited them. They agreed because the alternative was losing access altogether. A week later, I left inpatient rehabilitation using a cane. Renee drove me home. The townhouse had been cleaned, the PIC supplies removed, and my phone returned through counsel after a forensic copy was preserved. I stood in my kitchen beside the place where the cooler had rested and waited for fear to arrive. What came instead was anger, quieter and more useful than panic. That night, at 11:48, my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Elaine did not ask how I felt. She did not apologize for the hospital forms or for standing silent while Tessa questioned my mind. I found a draft statement in the transaction folder, she said. Her voice sounded thin. It says your father ordered the delay, I handled the patient payments, and Miles changed the records on our instructions. Did either of you approve that statement? No. Who created it? Transaction Counsel sent the first draft to Tessa. The metadata says she rewrote it 3 days ago. Tessa had prepared a version of the scandal in which our parents became the architects, Miles became the technician, and she became the daughter who had followed orders while trying to save the company. Mom drew a shaky breath. Tessa wrote a version where your father and I ordered everything, she said. Tell me what you need preserved. My mother wanted to know whether giving us Tessa's draft would protect her and my father from being sued. I told her the truth. No. Elaine went silent on the phone. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my cane hooked over the chair beside me. Renee had driven home an hour earlier, but I called her back as soon as my mother mentioned the document blaming our parents. She joined the conversation through a secure conference line and recorded it with everyone's consent. What happens to us if we cooperate? Mom asked. That depends on what you knew, what you approved, and whether you continued hiding it after you understood the risk, Renee said. Marissa cannot promise immunity, and neither can I. My mother drew a shaky breath. Then why would Douglas agree to hand over anything? Because destroying or withholding evidence would make his position worse, I said. And because patients were harmed. She did not answer that part. I gave her clear instructions. She and Dad were not to forward documents through ordinary email, delete messages, reorganize folders, or discuss their testimony with Tessa. They would contact Renee's office from a separate device. Outside counsel would arrange collection of the transaction folder, meeting notes, phones, and any handwritten records. Mom asked whether she could first make copies for herself. No, Renee said. Counsel will create forensic copies and provide your attorney with the appropriate records. Do we need separate attorneys? Yes. The answer frightened her more than anything else we said. Marissa, she whispered. We are still your parents. I know. You sound as if we are strangers. I am treating you like adults who signed documents and attended meetings. Being my parents does not make those records disappear. She began to cry quietly. A year earlier, I might have softened the terms, offered reassurance I could not guarantee, or told her I would make sure the investigation distinguished between Tessa's actions and theirs. This time, I waited. I need you to preserve everything before I comfort you, I said. Those are the conditions. Mom agreed. Douglas resisted for another day. His attorney eventually explained that the preservation notice already applied to any transaction records in his possession. Refusal would not keep the documents private. It would only create evidence that he had resisted lawful preservation. He signed the acknowledgement the following afternoon. The first production contained 12 pages of handwritten meeting notes, text messages from a family group thread, 2 versions of North Star's disclosure schedule, and Tessa's draft statement assigning responsibility to our parents and Miles. Renee brought the materials to my house in a sealed evidence box. June joined us by video. Owen was not present. Under the restrictions we had imposed, he received only documents directly related to Nora or communications addressed to him. Dad's notes were written in tight blue ink on ValeCare legal pads. He had attended a meeting in July after Nora Bennett's complaint reached senior management. Tessa, Douglas, the pharmacy director, and corporate counsel had been present. One line read, "Possible temperature excursion. Hold affected release group pending verification." Another read, "T says complaint likely administration error, wants 48 hours before committee notification." Douglas had initialed beside the delay. My father had not ordered the medication released. He had agreed to wait 48 hours before escalating the complaint while the pharmacy checked distribution data. That was a serious failure of judgment, but it was not the same as authorizing months of concealment. The next page showed the difference. 3 days later, Dad had written, "Still no complete temperature report. T says resolved through med review. No committee action needed." There was no attached medical review. A text from Douglas to Tessa asked, "Are you certain the product is cleared?" Tessa answered, "Yes. Alan signed off. I'm closing the complaint." Dr. Alan Pierce's actual note did not clear the release group. It stated that the patient's worsening infection could have multiple causes, and that product potency could not be ruled out without testing the remaining medication. Tessa had converted uncertainty into approval. My mother's records showed that she knew Nora's family had requested reimbursement for rehabilitation expenses. Elaine had approved a small payment from ValeCare's Patient Support Fund after Tessa described it as goodwill unrelated to product responsibility. Mom had not altered the complaint. She had accepted Tessa's summary without reading Nora's underlying file because she preferred a solution that required no public admission. The family group texts were harder to read. When the North Star process began, Dad wrote that all unresolved claims had to be disclosed. Tessa replied that Nora's complaint was closed and not material unless someone makes it material. Mom sent a message asking whether I had seen the file. Tessa answered, "Marissa sees every loose thread as a reason to pull down the whole coat." My father replied with a thumbs-up symbol. I stared at that tiny blue hand longer than any legal document. It was not proof that he knew Tessa would send ineffective medication to me. It was proof that he had repeatedly treated my caution as a greater threat than her secrecy. June reviewed the notes with outside counsel. The committee concluded that Tessa knew about Nora's complaint, the temperature concern, the missing product, and the absence of a definitive medical clearance months before she presented ValeCare's safety disclosures to North Star. She still had one chance to correct them. Renee and June sent North Star a confidential notice identifying a potential material product safety issue, an active independent investigation, and evidence that certain complaint and routing records might have been altered. The notice did not accuse Tessa of attempted murder. It did not speculate about criminal intent. It described what could be supported. North Star immediately suspended automatic closing rights. That did not mean the transaction ended that afternoon. The purchase agreement gave ValeCare a limited cure period. North Star's attorneys scheduled a pre-closing meeting to determine whether corrected disclosures, additional indemnity, regulatory cooperation, and a delayed closing could preserve any part of the deal. The written instructions sent to Tessa were impossible to misunderstand. She had to disclose every known material safety complaint, every active internal investigation, every record change under review, and any event that could make an earlier representation inaccurate. She was warned that North Star would rely on her updated certificate when deciding whether to proceed. June forwarded me the instructions. "She can still reduce the damage," I said. Renee looked at me across my dining table. "Do you believe she will?" I believe she will calculate whether telling the truth costs more than being caught. And she still thinks being caught is something that happens to other people. The cure meeting was scheduled for a Friday morning at North Star's Columbus Counsel's office. Tessa attended with her attorney, transaction counsel, Douglas, and Elaine. 2 North Star attorneys, an escrow officer, June, and outside compliance counsel were also present. I waited with Renee in a smaller room across the corridor. Owen wanted me inside from the beginning. She should have to look at you while she signs, he said during our call the night before. That would give her an excuse to turn the meeting into a family confrontation. She nearly killed you. She caused my treatment to fail because she wanted me out of a meeting. I do not need to make it sound worse to make it unforgivable. She will perform for everyone in that room. Then let her perform for the documents. He exhaled through his nose. You always make revenge sound like an audit procedure. This is not revenge if the outcome depends on me frightening her into a mistake. She has been told what to correct. She knows what the certificate means. Her decision needs to belong to her. Owen did not agree, but he stopped arguing. At 9:15 on Friday morning, North Star's lead counsel began reviewing each cure item. Renee and I listened through an authorized audio connection from the adjoining room. I could hear papers turning and chairs shifting, but I could not see anyone. Tessa's voice was composed. She acknowledged that an independent committee was reviewing administrative inconsistencies in several complaints. She said no evidence had established that any ValeCare product was defective. She described my hospitalization as an individual treatment failure complicated by a pre-existing infection. North Star's attorney asked whether any executive had altered a quarantine record. Tessa answered, "Not to my knowledge." He asked whether her credentials had been used to release VC417. There was an administrative correction from my office. I did not personally route medication to any patient. Was the release group under active temperature review? The review had been resolved operationally. Where is the resolution? We are still locating the final supporting note. The attorney reminded her that the absence of a final note was itself part of the disclosure question. Tessa said she understood. North Star then presented revised schedules listing Nora's complaint. My hospitalization, the committee investigation, the preserved audit logs, and the possibility of record manipulation. Had Tessa accepted those schedules, the deal would likely have been delayed and repriced. She would almost certainly have lost her closing bonus, and perhaps her future operating role, but she would have avoided certifying a version she knew was incomplete. Her attorney requested a private recess. 20 minutes later, they returned with a different disclosure schedule. Tessa's version described Nora's complaint as resolved patient misuse. It described the other 2 complaints as non-product related. It stated that no material adverse event remained undisclosed and no executive had knowingly manipulated a safety record. It also described me as medically unavailable and not presently able to provide reliable historical context regarding company operations. I read that line on the copy Renee received through the secure portal. Tessa was still trying to turn my injury into authority for her version of events. North Star's attorney asked whether she had read the entire bring-down certificate. Yes. Have you discussed it with counsel? Yes. Do you understand that North Star is relying on your personal certification that the updated schedules disclose all known material issues? Yes. The escrow officer identified each signature line. Transaction counsel confirmed that no one was requiring her to sign that morning. She could request more time, adopt North Star's broader disclosure, or postpone the decision. Tessa asked what would happen to her closing bonus if the investigation were identified as material. North Star's counsel said compensation would be reconsidered with the rest of the transaction. She asked whether she would remain chief executive after closing. He answered that North Star could not make that commitment while the committee investigated her conduct. The room went quiet. I knew that silence. Tessa was no longer deciding how to protect ValeCare. She was deciding whether a deal without her victory was worth saving. She signed. The secure portal updated less than a minute later. Her electronic signature appeared beneath statements declaring that there was no undisclosed material adverse event, no known record tampering, and no internal investigation requiring additional disclosure beyond the narrow language she had provided. Renee saved the completed certificate into the litigation repository. No one tricked her, she said. No hidden page. No altered language. She asked about the bonus before she signed. That detail told me more about her state of mind than any raised voice could have done. While the pre-closing team reviewed the certificate, Renee's phone vibrated. Owen had sent an urgent message. Tessa had contacted him at 7:40 that morning. The email warned that if he did not withdraw his statement and acknowledge that he had approached ValeCare under false pretenses, the company would release records showing Nora's treatment history, alleged storage failures, and behavioral instability during the complaint process. A voicemail followed. Owen's consulting phone system automatically forwarded incoming voicemail files to an encrypted business archive. He sent Renee the original audio file, the forwarded email, the call metadata, and the system log showing when the message was received. He did not edit or transcribe it before preserving it. Renee played it through headphones, then handed them to me. Tessa's voice was low and controlled. You have until 9:30 to correct your statement. If you continue helping Marissa manufacture this narrative, Nora's full history becomes part of the defense. Every inconsistency, every accusation, every time she failed to follow instructions. You wanted her name cleared. Think carefully about what happens when the public sees everything. She was not threatening to invent a record. She was threatening to expose a patient's private medical history, to force her father to withdraw evidence. The message arrived after the cure instructions, and before she signed the certificate denying interference with the investigation. Renee sent the file directly to outside counsel and the regulator contact already assigned to the matter. Owen was instructed not to respond. Across the corridor, the meeting resumed. North Star's lead attorney asked Tessa to explain why her disclosure omitted the preserved version of Nora's complaint. She said the original was preliminary and the final version was authoritative. He placed both versions on the table. We heard the papers slide across the polished surface. The original identifies a possible temperature excursion, he said. The final version changes the release code and attributes the failure to patient conduct. Which version did you certify was true? No one answered immediately. Then June opened the door to the room where Renee and I had been waiting. Marissa, she said, North Star has asked you to join us. I stood carefully, took my cane, and crossed the corridor under my own power. For the first time since the ICU, I walked into a room because I had chosen to enter it. The conference room went quiet when I entered with my cane. Tessa sat at the center of the long table, the signed certificate resting beside her right hand. Douglas and Elaine occupied the seats behind her, no longer arranged like proud parents attending their daughter's victory. North Star's attorneys had spread two versions of Nora Bennett's complaint across the polished surface. My sister looked at my cane before she looked at me. This meeting concerns a transaction Marissa has been trying to stop for weeks, she said. Allowing her to participate now creates an obvious conflict. North Star's lead attorney gestured toward the empty chair across from her. Miss Vale was invited because she served for her. When the relevant records were created, she will answer factual questions. I am still Chief Compliance Officer, I said. Tessa's mouth tightened. You have been on medical leave. Medical leave did not erase the records. Renee pulled out the chair for me. I lowered myself carefully, placed the cane against the table, and opened the folder we had prepared the night before. My presentation had been reduced to 14 minutes because I still tired quickly. The facts did not need a longer performance. North Star's attorney pointed to the first complaint file. The original version identified a possible treatment failure connected to a temperature excursion. The later version blamed Nora's administration practices, changed the release code, and removed the recommendation for further product review. Tessa pressed one finger against the original page. Where did this copy come from? The Independent Preservation Archive, Renee said. An archive, Marissa ordered. Under ValeCare's approved compliance policy. After she decided I was hiding something. Before she entered intensive care, Renee answered. Tessa looked toward North Star's attorneys. Marissa had administrator-level access. She could have created an earlier-looking document and arranged for it to be preserved. Renee uploaded the preservation certificate to the room's display. The e-discovery vendor had captured the complaint database, revision history, email repository, access logs, and routing records, 15 days before Owen entered my hospital room. The vendor operated under ValeCare's existing contract and business associate agreement. Each file had been assigned a digital hash when collected. Outside counsel received automatic confirmation the same day. The original complaint existed in the archive before I became ill. So did the altered version. So, Marissa preserved 2 drafts, Tessa said. That does not establish which one was accurate. No, I said. The supporting records establish that. I opened my timeline. Nora Bennett received medication carrying release code VC417 in July. Her pharmacy record and shipping record contain that code. Her initial complaint references a possible temperature excursion and treatment failure. The final complaint changes the code to VC419 and attributes the outcome to patient misuse. I placed Nora's authorization beside the records. She had permitted her complaint and treatment history to be reviewed for the investigation. Nothing outside that authorization would be discussed in the room. The remaining medication was discarded before independent testing, I continued. That means we cannot prove the product caused Nora's decline. It also means ValeCare could not honestly claim the product had been cleared. Tessa folded her arms. Exactly. There was no proof of a defect. There was an unresolved safety question. That is not the same thing. I have never said it was. Her attorney glanced at her. I moved to the next page. VC417 was later placed in quarantine pending review. 3 bags from that release group were removed through an executive override. They were manually assigned to my normal delivery route. The downstream system then displayed them as approved medication. Tessa interrupted. Someone used credentials connected to my office. Yes. That does not prove I entered the order. No. It proves the order came through your authority, your assigned laptop, your home internet connection, and the phone registered to you for multi-factor approval. You were unconscious when that analysis occurred. June Park and outside counsel supervised it. June sat near the end of the table. She turned the access matrix toward North Star. The technical review was performed by the independent committee's forensic vendor, she said. Marissa did not access the live system after her hospitalization. The findings can be reproduced from preserved logs. Tessa looked toward Miles Denning, who attended by secure video with his attorney. This entire system belonged to Miles, she said. He could create or alter any record he wanted. Miles did not look at her. I changed Nora Bennett's complaint classification, he said. Tessa called and told me the medical review had cleared the product. I used the operations review account because she said the correction needed to be completed before the quarterly metrics closed. You told me it was a clerical error, Tessa said. No, you told me it was. His attorney touched his arm, reminding him not to turn the testimony into an argument. Miles continued. I should have demanded the supporting review. I did not. I was afraid refusing the CEO over one field would cost me my job. North Star's attorney asked whether he had authority to release quarantined medication. No. Could you create an executive priority assignment? No. Could you change the quarantine reason after Marissa entered intensive care? Not through my account, and not through the shared operations account. June displayed the permissions chart. Miles could edit complaint classifications. He could repair routing errors after operations created them. He could not remove a pharmacy quarantine, suppress downstream warnings, or approve an executive priority release. Tessa's explanation had lost one possible culprit. She found another. My father had access to my home office, she said. He was involved in the transaction and knew the sale depended on keeping the company stable. Douglas stared at her. You are saying I used your laptop at 2 a.m. to send medication to Marissa? I am saying several people had access. Your phone was required to approve it. You knew my passcode. Dad opened the folder in front of him. I also kept notes. He handed the July meeting pages to North Star's attorney. The notes showed that Douglas had agreed to a 48-hour delay while the temperature issue was reviewed. They also showed that Tessa later told him Dr. Alan Pierce had cleared the product. Dr. Pierce's actual note said the opposite. Product failure could not be ruled out without testing the remaining medication. Douglas looked at my sister. You told me the medical question was resolved. I summarized the conclusion. You changed it. I made an executive judgment. You told me there was nothing left to disclose. There was nothing material. Elaine placed Tessa's draft statement beside the notes. This says Douglas ordered the delay. I handled patient payments to keep families quiet, and Miles changed records on our instructions, she said. You wrote it 3 days ago. Tessa looked at both of them with open contempt. You benefited from every decision I made, she said. Now that Marissa has frightened you, you are pretending you were innocent spectators. We were not innocent, Douglas said. We trusted what you told us because it protected what we wanted. Mom's voice shook, but she did not look away. That does not mean we will accept responsibility for what you did afterward. Tessa laughed once. Cowards. My parents reacted as if she had struck the table. I did not intervene. For most of my life, I had been expected to translate Tessa's cruelty into something the family could forgive. I was not going to protect anyone from finally hearing her clearly. North Star's lead attorney returned to the medication route. The courier manifest showed that the cooler entered van 12 at 7:03 that morning. The driver scanned it at my address at 9:12. Carla Monroe scanned all 3 bags before the first infusion. The barcodes matched the quarantine doses identified in the executive priority order. There had been no warehouse mix-up, driver substitution, or nursing error. I explained what happened next without dramatizing it. The medication did not effectively control the infection. After 2 doses, my symptoms worsened. I called the pharmacy and my surgeon's office, then called emergency services when I became short of breath and weak. Paramedics transported the remaining bag and packaging to the hospital under documented custody. I developed sepsis and required ventilation. Tessa stared at the papers rather than at me. I am not claiming she knew exactly how severe my illness would become, I said. I cannot prove that, and the regulators will determine what intent can be established. What the records prove is that she knew the release group had not been cleared, used executive authority to return 3 doses to circulation, assigned them to my delivery route after I threatened to report the unresolved complaints, and rewrote the quarantine explanation after I became unconscious. North Star's attorney lifted the bring-down certificate. Miss Tessa Vale, were you aware of the independent investigation before signing this document? Yes. Were you aware that your credentials appeared in the quarantine and routing records? I knew they appeared. I disputed what that meant. Were you aware that the original Nora Bennett complaint had been preserved? I knew Marissa claimed to have an earlier version. Were you aware that Owen Hale alleged you hired him to provoke a reaction from Marissa in intensive care? He misrepresented his purpose and manipulated my sister. The attorney placed a printed copy of Tessa's email beside the certificate. The email authorized Owen to assess whether references to Vale Care caused me irrational agitation. The contract called the work a behavioral response assessment. The hospital visitor form identified him as a medication risk consultant approved by Tessa. Then Renee provided the voicemail Tessa sent on the morning of the cure meeting. No one played Nora's private medical details. The relevant threat had already been isolated and authenticated by the voicemail system. Tessa had warned Owen that his daughter's history would be released if he did not withdraw his statement. The message existed before Tessa signed a certificate, declaring that she had not interfered with the investigation. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. Tessa pushed his arm away. "Are we seriously pretending Owen is a victim?" she asked. "He spent months creating a path into our company. He lied about his reasons, he approached employees, he entered Marissa's room while she could not move. He did not lie about his identity or credentials," Renee said. "He disclosed his personal interest before we relied on his statements. His unauthorized employee contacts were documented, and he was removed from witness outreach. You still used him. We verified him." Tessa turned to me. "He used your fear, and you let him. I did not trust Owen because he frightened me in the ICU. I trusted only the parts of his information that independent records confirmed. You wanted me guilty. I wanted the release code explained. You wanted my job. I refused your job this morning." That was the first time she looked confused. June had already asked whether I would serve as interim chief executive if Tessa were suspended. I had declined before entering the room. I would cooperate with the investigation and help repair the compliance program. But I would not turn a patient safety failure into my promotion. North Star's lead attorney called a recess. The buyers and their counsel left for 23 minutes. No one at our end of the table spoke. Tessa studied the certificate she had signed as though the language might rearrange itself if she waited long enough. When North Star returned, its lead attorney remained standing. "North Star is terminating the current transaction based on material non-disclosure and false certification," he said. "The escrow funds will not be released." The proposed employment agreement with Miss Tessa Vale and the related closing bonus are withdrawn. My father closed his eyes. The purchase price had been $30 million. Tessa's closing bonus would have been $1,200,000. Her 3-year operating contract had carried additional compensation and authority she had spoken about as if it already belonged to her. All of it disappeared because she signed a certificate after being shown the truth. North Star's attorney continued. North Star may consider a future purchase of selected assets after regulatory review, patient notification, financial restructuring, and appointment of an independent operator. Any future proposal would be separately valued and would not preserve the current executive arrangements. Tessa stood. You cannot destroy a functioning company because my sister had a medical complication. The transaction is ending because you certified incomplete disclosures after receiving a written opportunity to correct them. I relied on counsel. Her attorney spoke calmly. I advised postponement and broader disclosure. Tessa looked at him as though he had betrayed her too. After North Star left, June called the independent committee meeting to order. The committee issued a preliminary finding that Tessa had intentionally failed to disclose material information and had participated in record manipulation and interference with a witness connected to the investigation. Under the shareholder agreement she had once insisted upon, her voting rights were suspended pending final determination. Her employment was terminated for cause. Her access to ValeCare offices, systems, bank accounts, and personnel ended immediately. Tessa still owned 22% of the company. June explained the distinction carefully. Her shares would not vanish that day. Mandatory redemption required notice, independent appraisal, resolution of offsets, and an opportunity for her counsel to contest the calculation. Civil claims and regulatory liabilities could reduce what she eventually received, but no one was confiscating ownership through a board announcement. Tessa lost control before she lost value. That seemed to wound her more deeply than the vanished bonus. You built this company on Dad's work, she said to me. Now you have destroyed it because you could not stand that he trusted me to run it. I placed both hands on the table and stood with the cane. The movement took longer than I wanted. No one rushed to help. I stopped you from selling the damage to someone else. The committee appointed an outside restructuring executive to serve as interim operator. I voted in favor. ValeCare would notify affected patients. Begin a supervised recall of the release group. Preserve all insurance and medical records, and offer paid cooperation leave to employees interviewed by investigators. An emergency patient support fund would cover testing and immediate treatment needs while civil claims were evaluated. The bank approved a temporary working capital facility after the independent operator and committee accepted financial oversight conditions. That facility, not my personal money, kept payroll and employee health coverage in place during restructuring. My own shares lost value when North Star walked away. So did my parents' holdings. The company we had expected to sell for $30 million would now be valued after recalls, claims, debt, and compliance costs. I accepted that loss. Protecting patients did not require me to surrender my legal rights, but it did require me to stop treating family wealth as more important than the harm supporting it. Tessa left the room with her attorney. Her badge and company devices were collected before she reached the elevator. No police officers waited in the lobby. No handcuffs appeared. What happened in that room was a corporate and contractual consequence, not a criminal sentence. The legal process began later that afternoon. Renee received 2 formal preservation requests. One came through investigators working with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. The other came from Ohio health regulators. They requested Owen's consulting contract, Tessa's visitor authorization, the hospital access log, the original voicemail file, payment records, complaint revisions, and the executive override history. The investigators did not ask us to announce that Tessa would be arrested. They asked us not to alter, delete, or discuss the evidence with potential witnesses. The sale had ended that morning. By evening, the case against my sister had begun. The criminal investigation did not move as quickly as anger wanted it to. No one arrested Tessa the week North Star terminated the sale. There was no dramatic search of our parents' home, no prosecutor announcing that every question had already been answered. Investigators collected records, compared system logs, interviewed employees separately, and asked the same questions in slightly different ways until inconsistencies began to matter. ValeCare continued operating while that happened. In December, an independent healthcare executive named Carolyn Mercer took over daily management under the board's oversight. She had no history with our family and no interest in preserving anyone's title. Her first decisions were to complete the recall, notify every potentially affected patient, and reopen all complaints that had been closed through shared accounts or unsupported medical conclusions. I returned as a limited compliance advisor rather than an executive officer. I worked 4-hour days at first, mostly from home, and attended meetings only when the subject involved records I had supervised. Caroline made the operational decisions. June remained chair of the independent committee. Renee handled my legal interests. The arrangement suited me better than I expected. Before the ICU, I had believed responsibility meant placing myself at the center of every difficult decision. Recovery taught me that competence also included knowing when someone else should hold authority. North Star eventually returned, but not for the original company and not under the original terms. By spring, it offered to purchase ValeCare's clean operating assets, selected pharmacy contracts, and several regional service teams through a new transaction. The price was far below the $30 million our family had expected. North Star assumed no undisclosed patient liabilities, did not employ Tessa, and required Caroline to remain during the transition. The working capital facility kept payroll current until the transaction closed. Most nurses, pharmacists, drivers, and administrative staff kept their jobs. Some corporate positions were eliminated, but the collapse Tessa had used to justify everything never occurred. Employees were not saved by hiding the truth. They were saved by separating the business from the people who had abused it. My own shares lost most of their expected value. So did my parents' holdings. I did not enjoy that loss. And I did not pretend money was morally unimportant simply because patients mattered more. I had worked at ValeCare for years. The shares represented time, expertise, and part of my future. Accepting a lower value was not a noble sacrifice I owed my family. It was the financial consequence of correcting a company whose reported worth had depended on concealed risk. Tessa's ownership took longer to resolve. The shareholder agreement required an independent appraisal, notice, an opportunity to challenge the findings, and a negotiated or judicial resolution of the mandatory redemption terms. Her 22% interest did not disappear when the board removed her. The appraisal valued her shares after the failed sale, recall costs, debt restructuring, and patient liabilities. The result was a fraction of what she would have received under the North Star transaction. Then came the offsets. The company sought repayment of compensation tied to false performance representations. Legal expenses caused by her intentional conduct were allocated under the settlement. A reserve was established for patient restitution and regulatory obligations. Tessa's attorneys disputed nearly every calculation before eventually negotiating a final number. She did not leave with nothing. That would have required confiscation rather than a lawful redemption. She received a relatively small net payment after surrendering all ownership rights, claims to future appreciation, and any role in ValeCare's successor operations. When Renee showed me the settlement summary, she asked whether I was disappointed that Tessa would still receive money. No, I said. I wanted her separated from the company. I did not need the process to become dishonest just because she had been. By then, the investigators had also narrowed the criminal case. The medical evidence could not prove Tessa knew exactly how sick I would become. No document showed that she intended my death. I had no interest in stretching the case into attempted murder because the harsher label would satisfy strangers. What the evidence did show was enough. She knew the release group had not been cleared. She used executive authority to override the quarantine and assign the doses to my route after I said I would notify the committee. She changed the quarantine explanation after I became unconscious. She signed a disclosure certificate she knew omitted material facts. She threatened to expose Nora's medical history unless Owen withdrew his cooperation. The strongest case was not about reading her mind. It was about false business records, deliberate concealment, and interference with a witness. Ohio regulators pursued a separate administrative settlement. Tessa agreed that she would not own, operate, or serve as an executive in a home infusion business for 7 years. That restriction did not come from the criminal judge. It came from the licensing and regulatory process governing the industry she had misused. By early autumn, her attorneys began discussing a plea. Tessa requested a private meeting with me before the agreement became final. Renee advised me that I did not have to attend. I agreed only after she established conditions. The meeting would take place in her office. Both attorneys would be present. Nothing I said would bind the prosecutor, the regulator, Vailcare, or the civil settlement. Tessa arrived wearing a charcoal suit I had seen her use during North Star presentations. It hung more loosely than before. Her hair was still carefully styled, but she looked tired in a way makeup could not disguise. For several minutes, she spoke only to Renee. She described the plea as a practical decision, rather than an admission of character. A trial would expose patient information, consume company resources, and force our parents to testify. Accepting responsibility, she said, would allow everyone to move forward. Then she turned toward me. I need you to write a letter asking the judge for leniency. I had expected the request. What would the letter say? That you do not believe I meant to kill you. I have already told prosecutors that. That is different. I need you to say prison will not help anyone. Her attorney looked down at his notes. Tessa continued. You can also dismiss your personal civil claim. The company settlement already created a patient fund. My claim covers harm done specifically to me. You still have money from your shares. So did you. Her face tightened. Not anymore. I waited. She took a breath and tried another approach. When we were children, you were always the one who could handle things. When I failed algebra, you tutored me. When I wrecked Dad's car, you convinced him not to take away my license for the entire summer. When I panicked before college interviews, you wrote out answers for me. I remember. You always knew how to fix things. That was part of the problem. She leaned forward. I am not asking you to erase what happened. I am asking you to help me survive it. You have attorneys, a plea agreement, a re-entry plan, and money from the redemption. That money will be gone after fees and restitution. Then you will have to live within what remains. Her voice hardened. You want me to come out with nothing? No, I want to stop being the person expected to replace whatever your choices cost you. She looked toward our attorneys, perhaps hoping one of them would translate my answer into something negotiable. No one did. Tessa lowered her voice. Mom and Dad cannot support me. They barely have enough after the restructuring. If I serve time, I will need somewhere to live when I get out. That is not a sentencing issue. It is a family issue. It is your issue. For a moment, the familiar resentment returned to her face. You get to be the strong one again, she said. I did not choose the ICU to make you look weak. You know what I mean? Yes. You mean my ability creates an obligation to absorb your consequences. She pressed her lips together. I gave her the only commitment I was prepared to make. I would not describe her conduct as attempted murder. I would not ask for the maximum available sentence. I would tell the court that employees and patients benefited more from accurate records and restitution than from theatrical punishment. I would not request leniency. I would not dismiss my civil claim. I would not return part of her redeemed equity, guarantee a loan, provide housing, or promise employment after her release. Tessa stared at me for several seconds. So this is revenge? No, revenge would require me to make your outcome worse. I am refusing to make it easier. She left without saying goodbye. The plea agreement was entered the following month. Tessa admitted to falsifying and concealing business records and attempting to pressure a cooperating witness. She agreed to continue helping investigators identify altered complaint files and to certify corrections under oath. At sentencing, the courtroom was smaller than television had taught most people to expect. There were no reporters packed against the walls. Douglas and Elaine sat together behind Tessa. Owen attended with Nora, though neither spoke publicly that day. I read my statement from a single page. I explained that the first harm was not only the failed treatment, it was Tessa's decision to use my physical weakness as an opportunity to control what other people believed about me. She had tried to transform evidence into confusion, caution into instability, and family loyalty into silence. I also explained that forgiveness and sentencing were separate questions. The court's decision should not depend on whether I forgive my sister, I said. It should depend on what she did, what can be proved, and what protects other people from the same choices. I will not exaggerate her intent, but I will not reduce her responsibility to make our family more comfortable." Tessa did not turn around while I spoke. The judge imposed 10 months in an Ohio State correctional facility, followed by 18 months of community control. The sentence also required compliance with restitution orders, cooperation in correcting patient records, and restrictions on contact with certain witnesses during supervision. It was not the longest punishment the law could have imposed. It was not symbolic either. When officers escorted her from the courtroom, I felt no triumph. What I felt was the end of an argument I had been forced to carry since childhood. The belief that consequences became cruelty whenever they reached Tessa. Nora's file was formally corrected before the end of the year. Valecare's successor withdrew the statement accusing her of mishandling medication. The revised record acknowledged that treatment failure occurred during an unresolved temperature excursion and that the company had lacked sufficient evidence to blame her conduct. The Patient Restitution Fund began issuing payments for testing, rehabilitation expenses, lost wages, and documented medical costs. Not every family accepted the first offer. Some retained attorneys and negotiated separately. The process was imperfect, but patients finally received documents that treated their experiences as evidence instead of inconvenience. Miles lost his position and entered a professional settlement, reflecting his role in changing Nora's complaint. He was not charged with releasing my medication because the logs showed he lacked the authority. He later provided training testimony about the danger of shared accounts and executive pressure. Douglas and Elaine surrendered all company voting rights through their settlement. The second asset transaction paid enough debt that they kept their house. Though the retirement they had expected from Valecare was gone, I did not replace it. I spoke to them occasionally. We met for lunch in public places and avoided company decisions. When my mother tried to ask whether I could help with one of their larger expenses, I gave her the number of a financial counselor. That was not punishment. It was an end to the family habit of treating my competence as a shared bank account. Tessa served most of the 10-month term and was released in August of the following year under community control supervision. I did not go to the facility. I did not send money. I did not ask our parents for updates. For 1 month, I heard nothing from her. Then, on a rainy evening in September, my doorbell rang. I opened the inner door, but left the storm door locked. Tessa stood on the porch with a suitcase beside her. She looked older, thinner, and exhausted. Her hair had been cut to her shoulders. A plastic folder containing release documents was tucked beneath one arm. She glanced past me into the house as though checking whether the guest room still existed. "Mom and Dad said I can't stay with them," she said. "My old friends won't answer. I have nowhere else to go." I kept one hand on the door frame. Tessa lifted her chin, and for one brief second, I saw the sister who had sat across from me in Renee's office, insisting that my strength belonged to her. "I served my time," she said. "You have to let me come home." Tessa stood on my porch with one hand gripping the handle of a black suitcase, and the other holding the plastic folder that contained her release papers. Rain tapped against the porch roof and ran in narrow streams down the locked storm door between us. She had served most of her 10-month sentence and spent the past month under community control supervision. She looked tired, but not helpless. Her clothes were clean. Her hair had been cut neatly to her shoulders. Someone had given her enough money to reach my house. "I served my time," she repeated. "You have to let me come home. This has never been your home. You know what I mean." I did. In our family, home had never meant a particular building. It meant the place where Tessa expected the consequences to stop. She glanced past me toward the stairs. "I can use the guest room. It doesn't have to be permanent." "No?" Her eyebrows lifted. "You haven't even asked what my plan is. You arrived with a suitcase and told me I had to let you in. That is your plan. I need a few weeks. My community control officer needs an address. I have job applications out, but no one calls back once they see what happened. You already have an approved transitional address." Her expression changed. Renee had checked the conditions of Tessa's release before she left custody. A reentry organization outside Columbus had reserved a room for her in supervised transitional housing. The program included employment counseling, transportation assistance, and financial planning. Tessa had refused it because she considered the neighborhood embarrassing and the shared living rules beneath her. "That place has 6 women in one house," she said. "There's a curfew. You are under supervision." A curfew is not unusual. I should not have to live like that. You do not have to like the available help for it to be help. She pressed her palm against the glass. I am your sister. I know. Then open the door. I remained where I was. Months earlier, I might have explained until exhaustion softened one of us. I might have listed every reason I needed distance and waited for Tessa to agree that each one was fair. That would have placed my boundary back in her hands. I am not letting you stay here, I said. I am not giving you money, employment, or access to my accounts. Renee verified the re-entry counselor's number. I will text it to you. Tessa laughed without humor. You had your lawyer investigate where I could sleep? I made sure I was not refusing you in a way that left you on the street. So you can feel like a good person? So I can make a responsible decision without making your recovery my responsibility. She looked toward the driveway. The rideshare car that had brought her was gone. Mom and Dad said I could not stay with them, she said. They claim their financial counselor told them not to take on another dependent. They are allowed to set that boundary. You taught them how. No, they finally learned they could. Her face hardened. They lost almost everything because of you. They lost the value of a company whose price depended on hidden liabilities. You always have the perfect technical sentence. I spent 2 years choosing accurate sentences because you used emotional ones to hide what you were doing. She stepped back from the door. Rain spotted the shoulders of her coat. I apologized in court. You accepted a plea agreement. I corrected the records. You were required to. I served time. Yes. What else do you want from me? I am not asking you for anything. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. Tessa had spent most of her life understanding relationships as systems of exchange. If someone was furious, she could apologize. If someone was disappointed, she could cry. If someone had power, she could offer loyalty until she found a way around them. She did not know what to do with a person who no longer wanted repayment, confession, or reunion. Have you forgiven me? She asked. I do not know what forgiveness will look like years from now. Then how can you lock me out? Forgiveness is not permission to return. She stared through the glass. I picked up my phone from the entry table and sent her the counselor's name, address, and number. I also sent the number for her community control officer. Tessa's phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. You have the right to build a new life, I said. You do not have the right to build it inside mine. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. You would really leave me standing here? You have 2 safe places you can call. If you remain calm, I will not call the police. If you try to enter or refuse to leave, I will. For one brief moment, I thought she might test me. Then she pulled the suitcase upright. You always wanted to be better than me, she said. No. I wanted you to stop making me responsible for what you chose. She walked down the steps into the rain. I stayed behind the locked door until she reached the sidewalk and called the counselor. I heard only the first part of the conversation. My name is Tessa Vale, she said. I was told you have a room. She did not look back before walking toward the covered bench near the entrance to my neighborhood. I closed the inner door. The house did not become suddenly peaceful. I stood in the entryway with one hand against the wall and allowed sadness, relief, and anger to exist together. Holding a boundary did not erase the fact that the person outside had once been the little girl who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. It only meant that memory no longer controlled the lock. I called our parents the next morning. Elaine began crying before I finished explaining. You could have given her one night, she said. Just one night so she knew someone still loved her. She was offered safe housing. She needed family. She needed me to remove a consequence she did not like. Douglas remained silent on the line. Mom continued. Prison changes people. She is paid for what she did. A sentence does not create a claim on my home. What is she supposed to do now? Work with her counselor. Follow supervision. Find employment she is legally allowed to hold. Learn to live within her means. You make it sound simple. I did not say it was simple. Elaine's voice sharpened. You have the house, your work, your reputation, and people who support you. She has nothing. She has a transitional room, professional assistance, part of her redemption payment, and the opportunity to begin again. She needs more than that. Then you and Dad can decide what you are able to provide. You cannot volunteer me. Douglas finally spoke. Your mother is frightened. I understand. She thinks Tessa will disappear from all of us. That may happen. Doesn't that bother you? Yes, it still does not change my answer. Mom accused me of punishing the entire family. I warned her once that I would end the call if she continued. When she said I had become colder than Tessa, I hung up. I did not call back to repair the discomfort. 3 weeks later, on a clear October afternoon, I met Owen and Nora at a small cafe near the botanical garden. The patio had only 6 tables, bordered by rosemary planters and strings of unlit bulbs. I no longer used a cane. Most people watching me cross the courtyard would not have known I had once needed 2 therapists to stand beside a hospital bed. I knew. My legs still became heavy after long days, and I scheduled demanding meetings before noon whenever possible. Recovery had stopped being visible to strangers long before it stopped shaping my choices. Owen was already seated with 3 cups arranged in front of him. You ordered for me? I asked. Decaf coffee, no sugar. I did not ask for decaf. You also did not ask for tachycardia. Nora arrived behind me, carrying a canvas bag of graded papers. He has become impossible since the investigation. I was impossible before the investigation, Owen said. That is true. Nora had returned to teaching literature 3 mornings a week. Her school had given her a reduced schedule while she rebuilt stamina. She still had medical appointments and occasional bad weeks, but color had returned to her face. I gave her a small ceramic pot containing a young jade plant. For your classroom, I said. It tolerates neglect better than most plants. Perfect. So do 9th graders. For Owen, I had brought a leather-bound notebook. He turned it over in his hands. What is this for? So you can stop writing critical evidence on receipts, envelopes, and the backs of takeout menus. My system worked. Your system caused Renee to label 1 exhibit possible soup receipt. Nora covered her mouth, but her laugh escaped anyway. We talked first about practical things. Nora's corrected record had allowed her insurer to reconsider several denied rehabilitation expenses. The Patient Restitution Fund had paid documented costs that were not otherwise covered. She had also received a formal letter withdrawing ValeCare's accusation that she had mishandled her medication. The letter did not restore the year she lost. It returned something money could not. Her name was no longer attached to a lie. Owen rested one hand on the notebook. Marissa. There is something I should have said before now. Nora leaned toward me. He practiced this in the car. I did not practice. You made me listen 3 times. I refined the wording. Owen ignored her and looked at me. When I started investigating ValeCare, I wanted someone to blame. I assumed the compliance department had helped bury Nora's complaint. I thought you might be no different from Tessa. You were prepared to use me for access. Yes. And then? Tessa told me you had found records she could not explain. She said you were dangerous because you understood the system. That made me question whether you had been part of the concealment or had just discovered it. He paused. When I entered your room, I had already decided I would not write the statement she wanted. But I still needed you to confirm the internal connection. That was not entirely selfless. I know. I am sorry I frightened you. You did. His expression tightened. I continued. You also gave me the truth before Tessa could bury it. What I did after that was my decision, but I would not have had the same choice without you. Owen nodded once. Nora placed her hand over her father's. He opened the door, she said. You made sure no one could close it again. I had come prepared to thank them. I had not expected gratitude in return. Nora explained that the corrected records had expanded beyond her complaint. Patients who had been blamed for missed doses, storage failures, or unexplained relapses had been contacted. Some cases were unrelated to VC417, but the review exposed a broader habit of treating patient conduct as the easiest explanation whenever evidence was incomplete. The new operator had created an independent patient advisory council with access to complaint trends, recall procedures, and quarterly safety summaries. Nora and Owen had both been invited. So have you, Owen said. I did not answer immediately. Who appoints the members? I asked. Nora smiled. He said you would begin with governance. Who controls the agenda? Does the council receive raw trend data or management summaries? Can members request independent review? How are conflicts disclosed? Are patients compensated for their time? Owen opened his new notebook. Now? I asked. I was told to stop using receipts. The council charter was not perfect, but it had authority to request investigations, meet directly with the Independent Compliance Committee, and publish dissenting recommendations if management rejected its concerns. Patient representatives held half the seats and received compensation. I agreed to join for 1 year, subject to the conflict rules. Nora reached for the cup in front of me and quietly exchanged it with Owens. He noticed before she completed the movement. "That one has caffeine," he said. "You cannot know that. The lid markings are different. You ordered 3 identical drinks." I adjusted one. "Why?" "I wanted 1 real coffee." Nora returned the cups. "This is why he was useful and exhausting." Owen laughed. It was the first time I had heard the sound without tension behind it. In the ICU, his voice had entered through an open door while I lay unable to reach the call button. Now he sat across from me in the afternoon sun, arguing with his daughter about coffee and writing in the notebook I had given him. I once believed strength meant keeping every door open for family, no matter what they carried inside. I understand it differently now. Some doors protect us because we close them. Others lead somewhere better because we choose, freely and carefully, whom to invite through. That afternoon, I opened one of those doors myself. You should never confuse forgiveness with unlimited access to your life. When someone lies, manipulates evidence, endangers your health, or uses family loyalty to avoid consequences, you are allowed to protect yourself without becoming cruel. The right response is not reckless revenge or public humiliation. It is preserving evidence, asking qualified people for help, following lawful procedures, and refusing to exaggerate what you cannot prove. You can care about employees, patients, parents, and even the person who harmed you without paying their debts, surrendering your home, or repairing every consequence they created. Strength does not mean handling everything alone. It means choosing trustworthy allies, listening to professional advice, and making decisions based on facts instead of guilt. You should also remember that serving a sentence or offering an apology does not automatically restore trust. Trust must be rebuilt through consistent actions, and you decide whether reconciliation is safe. A closed door can be a healthy boundary, while another door can open toward honest friendships and a better future. If this story reminded you to protect your voice, your health, and your peace, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories about courage, accountability, and starting again wisely.